Today in episode 52 of the podcast, we're reviewing the films Nosferatu and A Complete Unknown. We also want to wish everyone a happy new year. We hope everyone has a calm, less stressful, better 2025. But I'm Brad, he's Josh, and this is We'll Bring the Popcorn.
So before we jump into our film reviews this week, please don't forget to give us a like and subscription on YouTube. Hit that notification bell so you're getting access to our videos as soon as they drop every single Monday morning. Also, if you're listening to us in the audio room, please don't forget to give us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on. It really helps elevate the profile of the show. And also go to willbringthepopcorn.com, which has access to all of our archived episodes, as well as our social media information and our merch store. We are constantly updating our merch store with new stuff. Can't thank you enough for your continued support there as well.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. We're on episode 52. I mean, we do one a week, so that's an entire year. We've been doing the podcast for a year now. We started this kind of summer 2023. We started brainstorming and bringing together, so it's wild that we've already got a year under our belt. So we can't thank you all enough. Like, we appreciate everything that you all have done for us, from the merch to sharing to liking to subscribing, just all the support and love that you all have shown us over this next year. We cannot thank you enough, and hopefully it's bigger and better things in 2025.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again, and your support means everything to us. We can't thank you enough.
So kind of like last week, there wasn't a whole lot of news. There's a few little interesting things. We've shared it on our social medias and stuff, but we're just going to jump right into our first film review of the week, which is Nosferatu. This is a remake of the 1922 classic by Robert Eggers. It stars Bill Skarsgård as Count Orlok, and I'll go ahead and say, like, he was unrecognizable in this film. From his voice to the look that they did with him, like, if you didn't know that was him, you wouldn't know that it was him. Like, it was incredible just how different it was. But this was kind of surprising to me. Like, I went into it thinking that I was going to enjoy and have fun, but I really loved the artistic approach and touch that they did with this film, because, like, the black and whites were not just plain black and white. There was an artistic look to it, and, like, everything at nighttime was in that black and white artistic mode, unless there was a flame flickering and then you got some color, but everything else was in that, single. It wasn't exactly black. It was more like a bluish black hue and stuff to it. And you also got some really old school, like, camera movements and scenes and tricks. Like, this was definitely a love letter to the classic way of filmmaking, of the classic horror films of yesteryear and stuff, and I really enjoyed what they did with that approach and stuff to it. Of course, it takes place in the 1830s, and Robert Eggers is one who definitely pays really close attention when he's doing a period piece to make sure that things are, men and women are behaving how they should, everything is looking how they should, and I think that attention to detail really helped this film out.
Yeah, Robert Eggers is slowly becoming one of my favorite directors in the way, like, he shoots a film. His films are notorious for having kind of a slow build to this kind of epic conclusion that it reaches, and you get a lot of that in Nosferatu as well. And I want to give some love to Lily Rose Depp, who was also fantastic as our female lead, Ellen, in the film. She's amazing in this. Her physical acting, as well as her, like, emoting, her dialogue delivery, her presence in every scene that she's in. She was absolutely fantastic in what is going to be kind of like a breakout role for her, I can imagine. Obviously, she is the daughter of Johnny Depp, who is really starting to break out with this role. And like you said, visually, it's stunning. It's an ode to old school horror movies. It felt very much like an homage to that. But one thing I love about Robert Eggers is, like you said, it's that attention to detail. And you get a lot of that here. You get just sort of, he's good at setting moods and setting the ambiance and setting, a scene the way it needs to be set visually, even audio-wise. Like, it's even in dead air a little bit, you can kind of feel the tension in every scene that they're in, and he's so good at capturing that on film. And this movie just is another continuation of the incredible work that he's putting together over kind of the young career that he's had so far, because this is only, I believe it's only his fifth major film that he's put out. Fourth or fifth. I don't remember which one he's on now, but he's slowly becoming one of my favorite directors just in the way that he presents his stories. He loves working with the Skarsgårds, apparently, because this isn't his first one with him. Obviously, we're fans of The Northman, which is probably his last major film that he put out. But this film does such a good job of telling this story of the creature known as Nosferatu and what it needs and what its mission statement is. And you really just get this wonderfully told story that's dark, it's brooding, it's moody, it's almost operatic in its tone a little bit, in the sense that it's you get a very clear setting of, where we are, what we're doing, and what, our mission for our main characters are. And he does such a good job of capturing all of that in this movie that I was hooked the entire time.
Yeah, so was I. I mean, everyone played the roles really well, but I will have to get up for Lily Rose because she had a role that was a roller coaster. She had to show so many different sides because, the main story follows that her husband, Thomas Hutter, who is played by Nicholas Hoult, he works for this firm. He's trying to, I guess, get full partner and become part of it. So the last thing he has to do is help this Count Orlok out with, he's wanting to buy a home in their town. And so he is meant to be sent out to Transylvania to meet him, to get the deed signed and bring him back over. But we also come to find out that, as we all expected, Count Orlok is not who you expect him to be. He is the dark and evil vampire that is, destroying towns and everything else. But, Thomas's wife, Ellen, who's played by Lily Rose Depp, she is somehow connected. We find out throughout the story here that she has this connection to Count Orlok that is causing a lot of these problems. They're trying to figure out exactly what's going on. And so the reason he's coming to the town is because he's trying to get to her, but he has to have a domicile. He has to have a place of rest where he can go back to, or he's going to die. And so, yeah, that's the basic story of it. You've got a lot of great performances, a lot of great actors throughout this, but it does get very dark. I mean, very graphic violence. You get, especially when you said the sound, like there's one scene where something is bitten and something's bitten off, and you just hear the crunch and the drip of the blood and everything else. Like it's a heavy movie. It's a very dark movie, but a lot of it that got me was just the artisticness of it. Like there's a scene of Nicholas Holt's character, Thomas, walking through the woods, and it's just such beautifully lit and just so dynamic in what you see with the trees and the moonlight and everything around him. And then you get the carriage coming down the road at him, kind of lit the same way. And it adds a lot of dread and fear, but it's also very beautiful to look at. Like I just found myself just staring at the scenery because of how he shot a lot of these scenes. And then I think, of course, a lot of the old school horror stuff, like where the hand is just going over the town and stuff, done in the old style and the old way, and the way he used lighting and stuff. Like there's one, it's a very simplistic scene where Ellen is looking out the window and you hear Count Orlok's voice, but in the sheets and the curtains you see the shadow of him as the curtain waves in and out, and it was just beautifully done. Like it was something that just captured me because it's like, that's so simple but so effective way. And that's kind of what Robert Eggers did with this whole film. Like everything was done in such an effective and kind of beautiful way that got you, that seems really good and really fantastic. So while Thomas is away, he takes Ellen over to his friend. So that is played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, who's playing Friedrich Harding, and his wife Emma Corrin is playing Anna Harding. So we also get a little bit of depth with him. I feel like Aaron Taylor, he did well, but his character was a little more over the top, especially with his emotions towards the end and stuff. Like I felt he did good in it, but he's also playing the very standard 1800s male where everyone has to abide by his household rules and they must do what he says, and he's in charge and he's in control because he plays like he controls the ships and the shipyards and everything that goes in. And we end up finding a crashed ship with what they think is a plague, but it's actually carrying something even more sinister. So I think he did fine, but his was a little more over the top, as was Willem Dafoe. I feel like he was a little more over the top as well.
Sure.
But it was kind of a good balance between kind of the more straightforward with Nicholas Holt's character and everything else. Like I think it needed that kind of little bit of a goofy balance with the darkness overall of the film.
For sure. And, I think Aaron Taylor Johnson did really well with the the role that he was given, the dialogue that he was given. He's a character who very much loves his wife, as he's loving and doting on her throughout the film. And, he has his reservations about taking Ellen in while Thomas is off on this trip, because Ellen appears to be mentally unstable, for lack of a better term. She has these visions of things that she sees coming true, these horrific things that cause her to like convulse and seize up. And, a lot of that's what I mean with a lot of the great physical acting that she has to do for this, is she has to cut in from that manic to like calm, like dynamic that she has to portray throughout this entire film. And she's very much against her husband going out to meet this Count Orlok because she's seen a vision of where he doesn't make it back. And she's had this connection to Count Orlok that she's had since she was young, where she, kind of reached out and was like asking for some companionship, for lack of a better term. And the person who answered that call was Count Orlok, and they have this connection. So you have these characters that all play off of each other so well. And you have Nicholas Holtz Thomas, who's very much the straightforward businessman who is trying to create a better life for himself and Ellen by, making partner and willing to go and do whatever it takes, even if it means going on this 6-week journey to Transylvania, which I want to come back to for a minute, because it's kind of like my one nitpick I have about the movie a little bit, and some of the pacing that they had as far as that goes. But yeah, you have this whole setup, you have this connection that, Ellen has with Count Orlok, where she, kind of reaches out for some companionship. She calls out into the world for like some companionship. I guess she's like kind of lonely. This is kind of the beginning of the film where it's like, okay, where does this connection with Count Orlok come from? And it's kind of thrown out there at the very beginning of the film, like this connection that's going to manifest itself throughout the course of this movie. And they just it just plays off each other so well by the end. And I really enjoyed Willem Dafoe's performance as the professor as well. He's this eccentric, knows all the lore behind Nosferatu and what needs to be done to kind of stop him. And eventually it's just getting to the point where they discover that this is what they're dealing with, and he's the expert, and he's like, okay, we have to do X, Y, and Z. Now they have to lay out this plan to, stop him. And it goes on this really wild ride, especially in the back half of the film, where they have to go through all of the things they have to go through to try to stop this character from, continuing on and killing Ellen, which is what they're trying to ultimately do to protect him. There's all sorts of little twists and turns that they have to do, and almost kind of like leaving each other in the dark in some cases to, make sure that at the end of the day, this Nosferatu creature is stopped. And it's a fun ride. I really, really enjoyed the way this film went.
Yeah, because Count Orlok in the end ended up giving like 3 days. By the end of the third day, Ellen will be his. They will be together. But he does, even though he's a creature that's killing everything and taking what's not his, he wants her to make the decision. Like he can't take something. It has to be willingly given to him. So he wants Ellen to make that decision. Like, I will give myself to you. But I will have to give it up again to Bill Skarsgård. Like, that was an incredible performance by him, because he is in such huge prosthetics that he's wearing throughout, and you get this deep booming voice throughout the entire film that gives you kind of that sense of dread, and it doesn't sound a thing like him at all. And when he's kind of hidden throughout the film. You're not supposed to fully see him, and kind of until the end, and as it goes, because it adds that mystery, it adds that dread and everything to him. But every time you get a look at him, he matches really well. And this is what I talk about with the attention to detail by Robert Eggers, especially when he's doing a period piece. Like, Orlok is wearing traditionally what someone of his stature would be wearing, and you've got a mustache and other things to him. It's matching up to someone of his stature in that time of what he would look like. Because if you go back to the original 1922, he's more kind of looking bat-like and just kind of has the cape and everything else. But, he made him look very much fitting of the time and of his stature and everything. But I think he did a fantastic job because he had to be hidden in the shadows. He had to kind of be in the background and more subtle, or you're just hearing his voice. But he said, with bravo to the sound design, like when his voice came on, it was overtaking, it was booming, it was just, when you were paying attention when he was speaking, and then when he was on screen, you're trying to look at him, and it's like, okay, we're getting oh, whoa, he looks like, okay, he looks a little normal. Then he gets into, okay, he's not normal. But it was a fantastic performance by Bill Skarsgård. I think, out of all of them, Lily Rose Depp and Bill Skarsgård did just really fantastic performances in this film that really captured what was going on. Of course, she had to show possession and going like really over the top with her physical and her sounds and emotions and everything else. And, he had to be a little more subdued and dark and mysterious, and they both nailed it fantastically.
It was kind of a yin and yang situation between the two of them, right? And they do such a good job of playing off of each other. And, like I said, you get a very clear direction of, what needs to be done. And, they don't leave you guessing too much, which is a good thing, because you want it to be done in a way that the audience can follow along and they're not really lost or confused as to what the heck is happening. They do a good job of that. If I had to nitpick one thing about this movie, it's a very minor nitpick for me. The premise of Thomas's journey is he has to leave his firm, and it's a 6-week journey to Transylvania, right? And they make this big deal at the beginning of the film, like, oh, he's going to be gone for 6 weeks. Ellen is not a fan of the fact that he's going to be gone for so long. They just got married, like they're newly married, and he's already heading out on this 6-week journey to Transylvania. But on this journey that he goes on, you don't get the sense that it's a 6-week journey. Mm-hmm. Like, it almost feels like could have been like shrunken down to a week, because you don't really get a whole lot that happens on this trip other than, his run-in with this group of gypsies, which is a crazy scene. And I can't imagine that's more than like a day there. Like, he arrives at the worst possible time to meet up with this group of gypsies, and I won't spoil that part of the movie for anybody, but it feels like there's such a significant jump, and they made such a big deal about him being gone for so long that it was like, all right, well, now he's here. Like, it was just like an unnecessary time jump and like an unnecessary detail in the story that I don't really think added to anything. But the way they made such a big deal about it, I'm like, why does it matter that it's a 6-week journey? This could be like a 3-day ride to Transylvania where he's from, and it would have felt just as effective, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. The passage of time was a little off because most of it was on his journey back, which we won't go into spoilers on exactly what happened with him and everything coming back, but it was bits and pieces. We got 5-10 minutes here, we got 5-10 minutes here, and then he's back. So you don't get a great sense of time with that. I will have to say the whole connection between Count Orlok and Ellen, while they do touch on it, probably could have been flushed a little bit better to be a little more on just exactly how this connection happened and why it's been so long since he's, tried to capitalize on that connection and stuff. Because it's been a decent amount of time between their first meeting and where it is now and why kind of all that's happened. But those are probably the two little nitpicks I have with it. Past that is like, I was just really taken by the visuals of it. Like, it's such a beautiful film to look at, that it uses lighting so well. It uses color and just staging a scene so brilliantly that gives you that dread and gives you just some really great visuals. Even like, well, the ship coming in, you get some really old school camera work and look at stuff, and with the hands going across in different ways. Like, there, it really is a love letter, as we mentioned at the top, to the old classic filmmaking, but old classic horror and stuff mixed with modern technology. And just, it was visually a beautiful film to look at. Like, I was just taken aback by a lot of the visuals with it, because if that doesn't win for cinema, it's going to be a tough race between if it's for cinematography against like Dune Part 2, which is also another visually stunning film to look at. Like, they both did such a fantastic job with cinematography that really brought you into this world and this realm, and gave you a beautiful look at a very dark time in the 1800s there, with plagues and death and everything else. But it was shot so beautifully. The sound was fantastic, of really giving you that sense of dread. Even if, like you said, if it's quiet, it's giving you that almost, okay, it's eerily quiet. It's too quiet. The scene is just like waiting for you. And it doesn't shy away when it comes to, it doesn't have a ton, an abundance of violence, but when it does it doesn't shy away from anything, especially kind of towards the end. It has you sit in one of the final scenes of like, oh, okay, we're just going to sit here and we're going to watch this happen and we're going to look at it all. And it's like, Okay,
It's a little uncomfortable, yeah. But that's something that he doesn't necessarily shy away from as a filmmaker. He's kind of notorious for having one or two uncomfortable scenes in his films, which just adds to the overall emotional depth of the stories that he tries to tell, and it's meant to make you uncomfortable, and this does. Like you said, there's no short, like, so it's not heavy on violence, but when it does it makes an impact. Like, you have death in this film, you have frequent death in this film, and you have, very to the point, strong, graphically visual deaths in this film that I think kind of adds to that emotional weight in a way that helps the film. It's not gratuitous and it's not unnecessary. You could make an argument one death in particular may be unnecessary just based on what it is, and if you see the film, you know what I'm talking about. And that's what makes you a little uncomfortable.
Kind of disturbing scene.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, though, it's one of those things that just makes it very clear the threat that they're dealing with, and it's not afraid to take that swing, which I commend them for. It really does, because it could be easy to. I think you could have that same effect without that unnecessary death, in my opinion. But at the same time, he makes his mission statement known. He's like, you have 3 days to make your decision, but if you take all 3 days, there's going to be loss in your life, and you're going to feel it, and I'm going to come after everyone that you love and you care for, and he very much makes good on that promise in this film, and that just really leads credence to the real credible threat that he is, and how desperate they become to stop him by the end, that they're willing to, deceive each other in order to make this happen, in order to, defeat this monster, which we were hoping to get to at the end. And it comes to this, it reaches this real beautiful crescendo of, the way that the film ends, and I don't want to spoil exactly how it ends, but it's like, okay, I see why you had to deceive one person to get this result that you probably wouldn't have had without that deception. And it just makes total sense, and it's beautiful, and it's heartbreaking, and it's a smart way to stop the creature potentially, and it's such a good and fitting ending that this film isn't necessarily meant to have the happiest of endings, but I think it reaches its conclusion in a very satisfactory way that they could have missed on and they could have messed up, but I don't think they did. I think they did a good job of fleshing it out in the end, and sticking that landing really gains any type of film like that extra points for me by getting it to reach that satisfactory conclusion that I was hoping that they had.
Yeah, in the end, Nosferatu was a brilliant love letter and throwback to the horror classics of yesteryear. The film was visually beautiful. Like, there's some really stunning cinematography and scenes in this. The audio was fantastic. Bill Skarsgård was just kind of terrifying in the little bit that he got. Lily Rose Depp was brilliant in what she did. She had to be so physical, had to do so many layers and so many emotions. It was a fantastic role for her, but everyone played the role well. In the end, I would probably give this a 9. Like, I really enjoyed what they did with this. Like, it was beautiful, it was haunting, it was dark, it was disturbing, and I think Robert Eggers really nailed what he was trying to do here.
Yeah, I would have to give this a 9 as well. I mean, this is really such a great throwback to, like you said, all of those old school horror movies that we love growing up. If you love all the old black and white horror films, the old Draculas, Wolfmans, all of those types of old school horror movies that we love so much, it's really an ode to that and kind of a modern take on an old school class. It has that old school classic horror film feel to it. And Robert Eggers, like I said, is slowly becoming one of my favorite directors for that and the attention to detail that he plays. So giving it a 9 for this movie, I think, is a good landing spot for this. It's, in my opinion, the best horror movie to come out this year. I will argue that with anybody that, thinks differently on that. But I think for all the type of visuals, the tone of the film, it's not the scariest film, but I think it captures a lot of that emotional dread and depth that you want in a good horror movie. That it's not all jump scares and it's not all gratuitous violence, but it's a way that has some minor, I wouldn't really call them jump scares, but it has some intense scenes, it has some gore, it has that depth to this monster character that I think really lends it to getting a 9 rating. And it's such a brilliantly done film that I can't recommend enough to go see in the theater. Go sit in a dark theater. This is another one that when it comes home, I would love to get like a surround sound system set up and really watch it in the dark in my house on a surround sound and just kind of lose myself in that world.
This is one where I want to get like a nice OLED with like a Dolby Atmos system and
Yeah.
sitting there, because the sound and visuals really need something just really fantastic to show off what Robert Eggers was doing with this film. Like, cause go see it in theaters. It is well worth seeing on the big screen because of the sound, because of the visuals. You know, we saw, did we even see it in the XD in the Cinemark, or was it a standard showing? I think even at the standard showing, I thought I was in an XD showing at Cinemark, because it was just that great and that big and booming. And again, I didn't touch on Bill Skarsgård one last time with Count Orlok, but he was, you kind of forget at times just how tall he is. Yeah. He's 6'4". Like, that whole family is just ripped and trees gifted, and everything else, but his size definitely worked here, because he looked just so foreboding over top of everybody. And just, I don't know how tall Lily Rose Depp is, but like, he was, because he had to hunch down and he's kind of looking down upon her and leaning in, like, it just added so much. So his size, but his acting was fantastic. So, you know, Nosferatu is in theaters right now. We cannot recommend enough. It is the best horror film of 2024. Go check it out. See it in the biggest screen with the biggest sound that you can, because it deserves it. I mean, it's a throwback to classic horror, but done in such a modern, artistic, visual way that deserves to be seen on the big screen.
So now we want to move into our second film review of the week. This is A Complete Unknown, starring Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan. Now, this is based on a book that was written about Bob Dylan. It's kind of biopic-y, but it's based on a book that was already written about him. And this covers a very specific period of time, from his arrival in New York City in 1961 to what is probably his most controversial live performance that he's ever had, which was the Newport Folk Festival in 1965. So it's a very brief look into Bob Dylan's just legendary 5-6 decade career that he's into now. And it's set in that time period where you're just transported instantly back to New York in the 1960s. So it kind of starts out with, you know, Bob being dropped off by taxi into New York, and he's, you know, wanting to meet his folk hero, who is Woody Guthrie, who is in the hospital. And he's on this mission to find him, to let him know how much he meant to him and to play a song for him. And that's kind of kicks off this whole journey of, you know, Bob Dylan's career, from him, you know, playing these open mics to where he gets discovered, to where he becomes this folk legend very quickly, I may add, to where he's trying to break into this folk revolution that's going on in the early 60s, where you have, you know, some superstars in folk music like Joan Baez, who's a major player in this film, and, you know, Pete Seeger, who is played brilliantly by Edward Norton in this film, who's kind of like Bob Dylan's mentor and kind of helps break him into, you know, the folk industry. And it's just such a fun take on what's really an interesting human being, let alone an interesting musician, who kind of deals with this first little bit of fame, but it does such a good job of capturing not only the time, but the way Bob Dylan kind of approached songwriting and a lot of the eccentricities that he has to him as not only a musician, but a person. And I think they do such a good job of capturing all that in this short time frame that they're given to work with.
Yeah, I came into this kind of not ill-prepared, but just I didn't know a whole lot. Like, I know Bob Dylan's music. I didn't really know his story as much and deep, and I'd seen the trailer a couple times, but I came into it a little bit blind. Sure. And I was pleasantly surprised by it. Like, Timothée Chalamet was fantastic. He, you know, Bob Dylan has a unique way of speaking, but, you know, that translates into a very unique way of singing as well, and he captured that extremely well. He did his own singing in the movie, which was even more impressive, but, you know, he did a fantastic job. I will say that Edward Norton as Pete Seeger was actually a big pleasant surprise to me, because he was there was just a softness and this gentleness to him. He's playing this folk hero who's just kind of like a Mr. Rogers type of character. Yeah. He's just trying to keep the peace and keep everybody together and to share the love that he has for this genre of music. You get to hear him sing and play the banjo and other stuff. Like, I was impressed by Timothy, but I was really impressed by Edward Norton. He's a fantastic actor. He's done so many great roles and stuff, but there was just something different about the softness and the gentleness of his performance in this movie that really got me. Like, every time he was on screen, I was kind of like smiling, like, oh, hey, there's Edward, there's Pete, like, we'll see what he does now. Like, he was really fantastic, but no one was out of place in this movie. Like, Monica Barbaro was Joan Baez. She was fantastic. She sang beautifully. She played her role extremely well because she has a very up and down mixed history with Bob, which, you dive into a lot of this stuff where their character may not be as, shiny and good, because Bob is one, he kind of lives by his own way, his own credence. He's going to do whatever he wants, however he wants it, wherever he does, because we get him in a relationship with Sylvie, played by Elle Fanning, who did a fantastic job, and what she was given in that. But she has to go on this school trip, and he instantly just starts running around on her, and that kind of spirals a lot of stuff in the movie. But he also struggles big time with fame. He doesn't know how to handle how quickly he came into fame and everyone seeing his face and seeing him out in public, because there's a lot of funny scenes where he goes to sit down in a diner or at a club or something, and it's like, it's Bob Dylan, and they're just chasing him, and he's running and getting in a taxi cab. Like, it was funny, but also, like, you can see the dread. Like, he just doesn't know how to handle this, and you kind of see that with relationships, with his music, with everything. He's just not sure how to navigate, because when he gets his first record deal, at that time, especially with folk, they just want him to do covers. They don't want his original stuff, even though that's what got him noticed by Pete, that got him noticed by the record label and stuff. They just wanted him to do covers, but that's not something that he wanted to do. So there's a great dynamic with Timothy as Bob of trying to navigate all that, and you can see that emotions and the dread and everything on that, and you get to see just how kind of crazy over the top he was with his writing, and even the scenes with Joan where he's talking to her about her music. He's just very blunt, like, you're just trying too hard. You're trying to write an epic poem when you don't need to, and all this, like, very bluntly going out on it. But I was very pleasantly surprised with this movie. Like, fantastic performances all throughout. Music was great. Like, everyone who had to step in and sing these legendary parts did fantastic job. We even had famously Joaquin Phoenix as Johnny Cash and Walk the Line years ago, but we got Boyd Holbrook took on Johnny Cash this time, and I think he did a fantastic job too. Like, he only sang a little bit, but you got some very funny and good moments with him as Johnny, where he felt like he was Johnny Cash. Like, I was impressed by pretty much every single person that was in this film.
Yeah, the casting in this film was on point. Monica as Joan Baez, you couldn't tell she wasn't Joan Baez. Like, she really captured that essence as well. Who's such a main character in this story because of her complicated relationship with Bob Dylan, right? And you get to see some of the inner workings of some legendary folk hits that have become like their biggest songs. And you get to see Timothy really shine artistically as a musician and as a singer in this, because Bob Dylan is notoriously not an easy artist to cover. Like, especially if you're trying to sing exactly like him, he has such a unique way of expressing vocally, his songs, and it's hard to really nail that. And I think he did such a good job of, like, really capturing that essence of Bob Dylan in his voice. And, like, it's one of my favorite performances he's had. He's had a really good year.
This is one of his best performances.
You have this and Dune 2 this year. Like, Timothy's killing it this year, right? He's got some really good films, and he just loses himself in this role, and you see, like, the struggles that Bob had, especially early on, like you mentioned with the covers, and he kind of just wants to sing his own stuff. And then by the time he goes to sing his own stuff, he gets to that point where I think a lot of musicians get to, and the song becomes so big and you play it so much, you get tired of playing it and you don't want to play it no more. And he wants to play he wants to play what he wants to play when he wants to play it. And that kind of manifests itself throughout the course of the movie, where, like, you have the tour that he goes on with Joan, where Joan's like, okay, let's stick to a set list. And he's like, man, I don't play no stinking set list. He's like, I want to play something else. And there's some friction there. And, it gets to the end of the film, and you get to that very famous, if you know the story, the 1965 Newport Folk Festival, where Bob's like, you know what, screw it. I'm not playing this, he calls it like a boring acoustic 3 songs singing what you want me to hear. I'm going to play all new stuff, and I'm going to play the electric versions of it, because you do kind of see this evolution of Bob's music that goes from, being this straight, acoustic guitar and harmonica Bob Dylan to you start adding the band elements to it, and you start adding the electric guitar, and he notoriously in this performance comes out and plays a full electric set that very much angers not only the people in the audience but the people running the festival, who are kind of like gatekeeping folk music and what it means, and there's this friction there as well, and it comes to a head in a pretty cool moment at the end of the film where Bob basically gives everybody the middle finger and says, "I'm going to do what I want to do." And it was a really cool, truncated telling of what actually happened at that festival that was really fun. If you know anything that happened at it, eventually he does come back and he does the acoustic, encore ultimately, just to kind of save face a little bit. But it's a really fun story if you get a chance to kind of dive into what actually happened in that festival. They do a pretty good job of capturing pretty much everything that happened there, but you get just so many legendary songs that Bob Dylan has written over the years. You see, him writing some of these and playing them, and you get to hear him sung by Timothy just brilliantly. And you get to see a really cool moment with one of Joan Baez's biggest hits, and kind of him playing it and laying out what winds up being the melody for the song that she was kind of having trouble with. And just, you could just see the wheels ticking for her, like, oh, that sounds like, I get why you play it. Like, it's a really cool moment that as a musician, I absolutely love the authenticity that they give to it, and for that reason it scores so many more positive points with me, because it is well acted, it's well written, it's well directed, it's well paced. It's a little over 2 hours, but it doesn't feel like you're watching a 2-hour movie. And I think that's so important when you're telling these stories, that it doesn't feel like a drag to get through. And I really, really like this movie a lot more than I thought I would.
Yeah, James Mangold, who directed this, I put him and Robert Eggers together now, of two guys like if I see their name attached to it, I want to see what they're doing, because of course for the comic book fans, we had James Mangold stepped into that realm with Logan and stuff, and he did that was one that I still feel like Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart, they were all robbed of Oscars and awards because that was such a brilliantly done film, that he did a fantastic job there. And yeah, he did another fantastic job with this film. Like, everybody fits so well. I want to give a special look at Dan Fogler, who was Albert Grossman. Like, he was so he playing kind of that creepy manager and stuff, because there's a scene where, Bobby goes to an open mic night that Pete Seeger introduces him, and he's managing Joan at that time, but you've also got, I think it was Columbia was there, and so Bob starts playing and he really likes her song, so Albert just walks over to the Columbia guy. He's like, yeah, he's mine. Like, he's never talked to Bob in his life, and he just go ahead and calls that he's my client, so I'm his manager. So yeah, if you want something with him, you got to talk to me. Like, and especially like towards the end of the film, there's some fights and stuff that breaks out with him, and especially like the scene where they're woken up earlier. Like, he was kind of that comedic backbone of being this sleazy guy who's also, he is trying to look out for the good of the people he's doing, but he's also a little bit sleazy in what he does and how he's just forcing himself in there. But he was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed his performance throughout there. And I would have to give to Scoot McNairy as well. He's playing Woody Guthrie, but Guthrie, but he's playing him ill. He's not really able to speak, so there's a lot of stuff that he has to do with just out of the side of his mouth or knocking or something else. And I think that had to be a hard performance to do. Like, you're playing a legend, but you get to play him in the worst part of his life, and who's being a big part of Pete Seeger's life, of Bob Dylan's life, and you're kind of just having to sit there and be kind of just in really rough shape, but doing everything through your eyes and your look and stuff. And I think he did a brilliant job in what he was given, because he had no dialogue. He just, other than there was a few grunts of what, he's trying to say Bob, but it's out of the side. Like, he did a fantastic job as well. Like, no one was out of place in this film. They all did extremely well. The only knocking points I could give on this film was the passage of time. You didn't fully feel it that well, other than when, you got Newport 64, then the Folk Festival 65. That gave you a little bit of a timeline, but like when he and Sylvie first met, and he's playing at a church, and they're recording the folk music, and he sits in a pew and starts talking to her, and then they go on a date, and then all of a sudden they're living with each other, and then they're this, and then she goes off, and now they're broken up, but you don't get to know any of that stuff until you don't know how much time has actually really passed in the first probably hour of the movie. Like, you're going through his journey and you know things are changing because he just goes from a nobody to, getting a record contract and everything with, Sylvie. But the passage of time was like really odd. Like, you didn't really know, was this a day? Was this a week? Did he and Sylvie move in the very next day with each other? Was it a month or 2 or 3 of dating before they moved in? You didn't really get a great sense of time with her, which threw me off a little bit because I'm trying to figure out, okay, they just started dating. Now is he staying at her parents' place? Is this their own apartment? Are they living together now? Like, it kind of threw me a little bit because I just didn't know how long we were dealing with in that time.
Yeah, I get that, but I also don't think like it was as crucial to the overall story they were trying to tell necessarily about their relationship because like obviously the name Sylvie, if you know anything about Bob Dylan, you know that that's not the name of the actual person that he has been in long-term relationships with. He very much asked them to not use her actual name in the movies. That's why they changed it to Sylvie, and that's why it's the only name in the film that gets changed historically to be accurate.
I did not know
accurate, that. But yeah, like he has a long-term partner named Susie. They changed it to Sylvie, which is close enough for the terms of the story, but that was a long-time partner that he had, and for whatever reason he kind of put his foot down and said you can't call her that in the movie. You have to change it. So they did change it for the purposes of that. Little fun fact if you don't know a little bit about Bob Dylan's backstory. But yeah, overall this was just kind of the story of Bob Dylan and how he became this folk legend, and it does jump around a little bit, but it gets to the point where you see his struggles with doing the covers, and he just wants to hear his own voice. And you see a lot of these guys that are gatekeeping folk music that are like, nobody wants to hear a young person sing folk music about current experiences or anything like that. And obviously Bob Dylan goes and proves them very wrong by becoming one of the biggest artists in the world. And you see how he starts to deal with that fame and how he starts, it kind of jumps off with his pen pal relationship that he has with Johnny Cash, because Johnny Cash writes him a letter.
Hysterical.
And they have back and forth letters that they write to each other, which is very funny and very touching in that movie. And you wind up seeing Johnny Cash physically later in the film that we mentioned by Boyd Holbrook, and he I think captures Johnny's essence brilliantly for that time period. If you know anything about Johnny Cash's life,
Johnny Cash bringing that guitar up way high, and pointing it out.
Because he's the outlaw, man. I love it. I love Johnny Cash so much. But you get to see a couple cool Johnny Cash songs in there as well, mixed in. Folsom County Prison, obviously, and it's such a fun take on a genre of music that doesn't get a whole lot of national love anymore necessarily, but it's such a cool, you're not going very far because you're not really leaving the New York area for the most part, and New York, New Jersey area, and it's just a fun movie, man. Like you said, nobody feels out of place. The casting's perfect. The girl that plays Joan Baez, Monica, is absolutely fantastic. You can't tell that she's not Agreed. Joan Baez. Like she's perfect casting, like physically and acting wise and vocally and everything. And you get to see that fun third wheel relationship, on again, off again flings that they have, and they kind of touch on that quite a bit and how it plays into some of the dynamics that they have. And it's really fun interactions that they have both on stage and off stage. But you see kind of a little bit of an insight into the complicated man and artist that Bob Dylan is and was. And it's such a fun trip through that brief period of time to see some absolutely legendary songs and the impact they had on that industry.
And yeah, because especially folk music in that time when he was coming up into it, it was very politically charged, and it had a lot of messages about injustice and everything like that. But he was starting to get, I guess they felt that politicalness and injustice couldn't be rock and roll, that it had to be acoustic and had to be this. So him deciding to bring in drums and electric guitars and everything else was something that was like, well, you can't be a folk musician anymore if you're, doing rock and roll and electric. And I really enjoyed some of the recording scenes. There was very few, but especially when he's getting his electric band together and stuff, especially you get Al Cooper who comes in and he's like a guitarist and stuff. And they're like, oh, we already have a guitarist. We don't need you, but I just want a chance to play. No, you're not playing. And unless, you don't play the keyboard. So like you can't do anything. So he just walks right into the recording room and starts playing the organ on one of his infamous songs. Like when you start hearing him play that, like, all right, I know that song immediately. And how much of that was true? If that was true that he was there to play guitar, but he just walked in and started playing the organ in a way that was like, because he didn't even know how to turn it on. Like they were helping him turn it on and telling him, all right, this is in C, let me turn it on for you. And he starts playing like one of the most iconic Bob Dylan songs. Like, okay, that's pretty funny that he just kind of forced himself into the band and just, I guess, just showed himself how to play the organ in that. Like, there was a lot of fun. There was a lot of dramatic and kind of darker stuff, but it was dealing with that Bob Dylan of he wants to be true to himself and be who he is, but it also means he can be a little flaky when it shows, like showing up on time, even very early on. Like he's supposed to meet the first record company at like 2 and he doesn't show up till after 3. And, he was supposed to do the public access show for Pete Seeger, which that whole thing was fantastic with the, our blues singer, which I forget the artist who was there on that show, but he was fantastic. But that whole sequence was great, but he shows up late for that. He famously shows up late for everything. It doesn't matter what he's committed to. He's going to show up late to it.
Yeah, it's such a fun take on him, and you capture all of the eccentricities, like we say. Like he's just an eccentric person. He's a free spirit. He lives life the way he wants to live it. He's going to do it how he wants to do it. He doesn't want to fit or conform into a certain box, which is so funny that we talk about how like folk music and protest songs and things like that were so popular back then, and say that politics can't be rock and roll, which it very much is now, which is so funny that like, they felt that way at the time, but I get it because, in the times it makes sense, but it's such a fun, like I had such a fun time going and just listening to these songs again and having a little bit of background into them and kind of, how Bob wrote, because Bob has always been notorious for coming, like as soon as the inspiration hits him, he has to find a guitar and a notebook and he has to write down his thoughts.
Yeah, most of the movies up in the middle of the night playing and writing. He didn't care who he was with. Yep. He's going to sit there and play and sing because it's there. He's got to get it down.
Yep, and he doesn't let it leave his head without getting into it. And it's fun to see that. It's fun to see that take on him. And Timothy Chalamet does such a good job of capturing all of that. But in the end, A Complete Unknown is a wonderful telling of a very short period of Bob Dylan's life. Timothy Chalamet gives an absolutely incredible performance. The entire cast is brilliant. There's nobody that's out of place in it. It's a wonderful tale of the years 1961 and 1965 in Bob Dylan's life, how some of the greatest songs that he's ever written were recorded, and the thought process behind them and how they were came up with, and leading up to this incredible, controversial performance at the 1965 Newport Folk Festival. Lots of great music, a lot of great stories. For that reason, I would give it an 8.5 out of 10. It's not a perfect movie, but it is really, really good, and it was a surprise hit for me. I've really enjoyed, their take on it and just telling the story of some of these incredible songs that were written such a long time ago.
Yeah, I agree. Like, Timothy Chalamet was fantastic. He got the mannerisms down. He was able to sing like him. Like, we've heard a billion bad impersonations of Bob Dylan, but he did a fantastic job of bringing him to life. You have Monica Barbaro was fantastic as Joan Baez. Can't say enough good things about her. But again, Edward Norton was such a bright spot to me in it because he brought in that softness, and it was just a great performance by him. It was a subtle, kind of toned down performance, but I thought it was such a great performance by him. But everybody did fantastic in it. I was surprised by the film. I didn't go in with too high expectations. I figured it was going to be good, but I didn't imagine how much I was going to enjoy it. I'm going to give this a 9 because I felt everything did good. The only real knocks I had was, even though it's nitpicking, was that passage of time with, Sylvie was a main person in his life, but we kind of got a little jumbled in time with her because it wasn't until we really got to that Newport Folk Festival that we started getting, all right, this is how the time is passing. This is all happening between these years and between, everything is kind of encapsulated in between the folk festival wrapping up every single part of his life here and that, 1965, which is like that was ballsy to that performance that he gave, and but you could see that in Timothy's eyes, like of the, you know what, they don't like it, but I don't care. I'm being me. Like, he was just so fantastic that A Complete Unknown deserves a 9 for me. I think James Mangold directed it really well. It looked and fit that time really well. All of the actors did fantastic. There was some good humor, but also some good heart and touching moments with a guy who's very complicated, and it's well worth going to the theaters to check out.
Absolutely. And one last thing before we leave this review, I wanted to mention, I forgot to mention when we were talking about it earlier, but that 1965 Newport Folk Festival was the last time that he performed at it. He avoided it for years and years and years, actually until the year 2002 when he finally returned and performed again. He was gone for 37 years away from that festival, and he finally redid it in 2002, and it was just this big deal. It was a huge epic event for them, and he just avoided that for 30, but that was 37 years of such a bad taste in his mouth, and it was kind of cool to see it come full circle. I would have loved to have seen them touch on that in the end, because even in the end when they talk about, you know, this legendary career that Bob Dylan's had, because he's, you know, decades of worth of records and over 55 records that he's made over the years. And it would have been cool to see them like mention that he eventually came back by 2002. Just a little nitpicky thing, but it is a cool kind of full circle moment that they don't really touch on in the film. Just kind of a little extra fact if you're unaware of it. But he did go a long time without performing at that festival, and he did eventually make his way back to it in 2002, which I think is actually a pretty cool way to kind of put a little ribbon on that story.
Yeah, because also didn't because it was very specific for those 4 years and stuff, so didn't even touch on his family and his kids.
Yeah.
And of course, his kid, you know, Jacob has become pretty well known by a lot of people. If you grew up in the 90s with the Wallflowers, he also had his own band under his own name and stuff as well, but they didn't touch on that aspect of stuff. But what they did tell, like, that it was almost 2.5 hours long, and it didn't really feel like it. Like, I was so engrossed and involved in the film, it didn't feel like I was sitting there for almost 2.5 hours.
Absolutely agreed. A Complete Unknown is in theaters right now. We cannot recommend enough going and checking out this movie. Whether you're a fan of folk music or not, Timothée Chalamet does give a great performance in this, and it's definitely one worth checking out.
So what's coming up? So it's coming up in January, up in the new year in 2025. So on the streaming side, we have Wallace and Gromit: Vengeance Most Foul. So this is a series that's always kind of had a cult following behind it. You know, it's stop motion, clay animation. It's done decently well throughout the years, and you know, Netflix has brought it back with a new film that'll be out on January 3rd. It's kind of funny because I look forward to them, because I worked in the game industry for a small time reviewing games and doing stuff, and the only game that I was sent to review by Gaming Horizon that I worked for was Wallace and Gromit: Curse of the Were-Rabbit back on the Xbox. That's the only game I professionally reviewed. So when I see Wallace and Gromit, I'm like, it brings me back to, because I was like 19, 20 at that time when I did that, and it was like, oh yeah, okay, I'll check out some Wallace and Gromit, because it brings back some memories of that game, which I enjoyed, but also just that time in my life, and having, you know, my biggest memory of Wallace and Gromit is the game that I got to review. But, you know, they've always been fun. They have that British humor and everything to it. So it definitely has its quirks to it that if you're a fan of that genre of British humor and stuff, definitely check it out on Netflix when it launches in the beginning of January.
Yeah, it's definitely one worth checking out. They're always fun, cute films to watch, and definitely one the family can enjoy.
On demand, we had Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim, had kind of a silent drop on December 27th. It was just dropped on a Friday, like, all right, here, after Christmas, you can have it. We also learned a little bit more about it. You can look in our archives to see our review of it, but we did kind of find out that it was rushed out into theaters and got put out pretty quickly because they needed to keep the film rights to Lord of the Rings, and they had to push out something, so this kind of got pushed out, and the movie kind of showed that it was probably a little rushed and a little pushed out, but definitely go back in our archives and see what we thought about it. Check it out on demand where you can rent and buy it now. But we also have a big film and an independent film that I was really looking forward to seeing, but didn't have a chance to check out in theaters. But Wicked is dropping on New Year's Eve on December 31st. You're going to be able to buy that on demand or rent it. It will have a sing-along version along with a lot of bonuses and extras to it. But we also have a Real Pain dropping alongside of it. So that was one that looked like it could be really good. But it's another one of those films that just came out amongst blockbusters and didn't, probably get the views that it should have or could have just because it was going up against some juggernauts at the end of the year here.
Yeah, it's getting a lot of critical acclaim though, so it's one that's being very positively reviewed by the people who have gotten to see it. It did get it kind of in the mix of the films that we were trying to review. We've been pressed for time, kind of lucky to get in the films that we were able to get in with the holiday season and the rush of the end of the year here, but super stoked to check out A Real Pain finally. That's one I've had on my list for a minute. Obviously stoked about Wicked. That's, spoiler alert, one of my favorite films of the year that we're going to be talking about next week, and just excited for that to get the drop on the 31st. The sing-along version is going to be a lot of fun with that. I can imagine everybody who's a fan of that musical is going to have a lot of fun with that version for sure.
And over on the TV side, we have the Golden Globes on CBS on January 5th. So, of course, Timothée Chalamet has some nominations for A Complete Unknown, but we'll see who wins that. So we'll have some coverage on the Golden Globes. Who follow along on our social medias, and more likely on X on Twitter, where we'll be sharing some of our thoughts on the winners and everything on there. But that's kind of it. This is the end of 2024, an entire year of podcasts, 52 episodes. Again, can't thank you enough. We really appreciate all the support and love and everything you all have given us. And we're going to keep going on in 2025 until someone tells us to stop, and we're going to have some more fun with it and try to mix it up. If you want to leave us some comments on the video, on our Discord, anything else, let us know kind of what you've thought. If there's anything you feel like we could do better, we'd love the feedback. We want to constantly improve, see what we can do better, what we might be doing off or wrong. We're trying to have fun and free flow it, but we want to put on a good show for everybody who's listening or watching.
Absolutely. Like you said, we can't thank you enough for continued support. 1 full year of the show, incredible 52 episodes. There's going to be so much more to look forward to in 2025, which is going to lead into our next episode. So coming up next week, it's 2025. It's here. We're ready. We're excited for it. There's so much to look forward to. Next week, we will be reviewing our favorite movies and TV shows of 2024, giving a recap in the year in film and TV, giving our thoughts on what we loved the most, and just kind of giving everything their flowers. We're also going to be previewing a huge year in 2025. There's so many incredible things to look forward to that we're going to be excited to cover, and we'll kind of dive into some of the things we're really looking forward to the most. But once again, thank you so much for your continued support, and until next week, I'm Josh, he's Brad. We'll see you then.